Welcome to MacGyver's Workshop, where you never know what we're going to be working on next. If you're not too careful, you just might learn something.
Hi there, and welcome to MacGyver's Workshop, where you never know what we're going to be working on next. Now this video is going to be part 2 of the 2007 Honda Odyssey that we're working on. And I would have loved to have gone into a lot more detail like I usually do on these videos, because this was a good juicy job, no doubt. But it went sideways along the way, and it became more important to get things done than it was to film. So that, it's a story of my life, things going sideways unexpectedly. So anyhow, let's give you a little background on this thing. When I first saw it, it was having random misfire issues, check engine lights, codes, we determined fairly early on that the VTEC valve, or the VCM valve, has a little screen, a little metal screen in the oil passage, and it was clogging up, and it was causing it to throw the misfire codes, because it was not, kicking the VCM off or on like it was supposed to, and it would act like it was misfiring. And and a little further on with that, we noticed that the inside of the engine looked pretty yucky. So whomever owned it before this girl did, she hasn't had it terribly long. It didn't have a good service history, let's put it that way, with regards to like oil changes and stuff, because it was pretty goofed up inside. And this last time it came back, she said that it overheated on her, and and it just wasn't running right ever since. So let's walk through what we found and where we ended up and how we got there. We will determine the root cause of her sudden unexpected overheating, which it had never done, to my knowledge anyway, prior to. And what we had was this thermostat has some kind of rubber coating around the plate that closes up the thermostat, and you can see that. You'll notice how this rubber seal here is bigger than it's supposed to be, and that's because it had swollen up from I believe exhaust and combustion gases and such like that, and which also ultimately perished this piece of rubber to the point where it just stuck the thermostat, and it was closed, and that was the end of it. So it overheated drastically on her, and that's when it cracked the cylinder heads. Now, the tricky bit is this thing has had a blown head gasket for quite some time, and I'll kind of explain why here in a minute. But you can tell that this is the head gasket here, and now, while not always, but typically, when you pop the head gasket off and you see this coating on these multi-layer steel gaskets, suspiciously gone in certain areas, chances are that's where the head lifted, and in this case, allowed coolant, to mix with the oil, and in this case, for sure, allowed coolant to, at the very least, get into the combustion chambers, which was making it do all that nasty smoking stuff it was doing when it came in. So now let's test this theory here. We might look at this surface of this cylinder head and, even, lay our straight edge across it and go, well, that doesn't look too terrible. Probably seen worse. But if you take and put some light behind it, it will tell an entirely different story. Now, this is that one section that I showed you. I'm gonna have to I'm going to zoom in here. You see all that light shining underneath there? Yeah, that's like major no bueno. So that's where the head lifted or warped, and there's no gasket in the world going to seal that. And then also, if we look here, this was the other position on the gasket that we were looking at. So what we're going to look at is this area right here. We're going to lay our straight edge across there, and we'll see that is significantly bad right there. So yeah, it definitely lifted the head when that thermostat stuck and it got hot, and they will get hot in a hurry, so you don't have a whole lot of time to react. Let me show you what leads me to believe that this thing had a blowed-in head gasket for quite some time. I did not clean these combustion chambers out. Okay, you can see this one over here is pretty normal looking. Okay, but these two, look like they've been cleaned out, wire wheeled or what have you. But I have not touched these, the inside of this head here. Of course, I had no reason to, because we knew the head was cracked. And let me show you where they cracked at. You can see a pretty good crack right there. And there's one over here too, where it kind of narrows near the exhaust valve. Now, if these heads are going to crack, that's where they're going to crack. Now, this one perhaps is a little wee bit more obvious. And you can see the crack here and the crack here. And of course, like I said, when it overheats that drastically, then they crack everywhere. But this one is really obvious. You can see it a lot easier. And there's a crack running between the spark plug hole and the exhaust valves, there and there. So these heads are pretty much junk. Now, I've heard of some shops being able to weld them up and fix them and such like that. I'm guessing that's possible, but right now the machine shops are so backed up around here. There's like a 6-month waiting list in some cases. Now, the good shops anyway, and My shop, I had a motor sitting with them, and it was there almost a year. So, there's not a whole lot of time here to deal with this, and of course the expense as well. So, what the decision was made was to try and locate a salvage yard engine, and problem is they're kind of hard to come by for this type of motor. Now there's plenty of 3.5 V6s out there, but the ones that have the variable cylinder management are very, very rare and hard to come by in good running condition because of the variable cylinder management system that had so many problems and blew up so many engines. Finding one's like finding a unicorn. So basically, after much searching, I did find one. I had to go to Roan Mountain, Tennessee to get it, and which is about a 5.5 hour drive from here. So, that's pretty much a full day, 12, 13 hour day of between driving and getting. So we got our motor, and as luck would have it, it was they thought they had a pretty much brand new motor, which turned out to not be the case ultimately, but there was some credence to the assumption because it has the little heat sensing little tabs stuck all over it, and builders usually put those on there to protect themselves from fraudulent warranty claims where the owner doesn't pay attention and they overheat it and it cracks a head or blows a head gasket. Well, my motor's got a 50,000 mile warranty on it, and they bring it back, and if those tabs are popped off, then they'll know. But realistically speaking, you can smell it from a mile away if you've overheated an engine to that degree of damaging it. So, but it's more of just a visual thing for someone who's maybe not, mechanically inclined. If you see the tab popped off, then it was overheated. We got back and I got started. Had both motors stripped down, and we basically just want the heads and the block from our salvage yard engine, because most of the other stuff gets damaged when they're yanking it out of the vehicle. They don't pay much care to how they get them out. What you're buying when you buy a salvage yard motor is a good block, good heads, and when you put it together and run it, it's a good motor. So, but let me go back over here to my small camera, and let me show you that things can go sideways in a minute. Now I'm going to kind of overlay some pictures I took here of what I found when I was going to put the timing belt kit on the new used motor, so to speak. And I saw this damage, which became visible once you started peeling stuff off the engine. And you could literally I could feel my heart sink to my feet, because that's like, I knew right away that this block the engine block was junk now, because that's a major structural part of the engine block there, where the motor mount, which is this piece right here. Okay, this is the front of your engine on the passenger side, and all your pulleys and your serpentine belt and so forth. And then this bolts to the engine block, okay, and then this piece here goes to the engine mount that holds up this side of the engine. And you know, this thing was cocked askew just a smidge, so you don't notice it when you're looking the engine over. I mean, heck, the salvage yard completely missed it too. They had no idea. But this bolt here was bent so bad that I couldn't even get it out. I'd have to, you know, drive it out with a punch or something. And then you can see, you know, this piece here, you know, as it was bent, it bent and broke this, which this in and itself is not a huge hairy deal, but you know, it took out the water pump and broke the water pump, and of course this is the piece that was broken off the engine block, and this piece goes, I think it's what, yeah, here I believe. Okay, and this part here is inside the housing for the water pump, and I've got a picture I'll overlay here to show you that. And I was hoping, well, you know, maybe you could weld this, but there's no dice. I don't get that lucky. So that really threw a wrench in the works, and at that point is when, you know, I stopped filming, because I had to figure out what I was going to do about the motor that I, you know, drove a 12-hour day for, which, by the way, the vehicle owner has already paid for. So that kind of puts me on the hook that, you know, I need to come up with a good, used, running, reliable engine for this minivan. And which is going to be no easy task, because I said before, you know, it's hard to find a good one, because the variable cylinder management issue that the Hondas have had on this motor. And at that point, you know, the yards just scrap them. They don't keep them around, even though they may have a perfectly fine engine block, because what dies is the heads. And but as luck would have it, I was able to make a miracle and find one, and you know, a good engine block. And I've got another picture here. Now, for those of you who follow me on Facebook, I posted these pictures recently before I had time to edit this video. I got really lucky on this, because the block that I found had to be a very low mileage engine block, because there was literally no cylinder ridge whatsoever, which is really uncommon in these motors. The bore, you know, surface looked excellent. You could still see crosshatch in it. No scuffing, no, the engine block was in immaculate shape. So I was able to come up with that, and of course, you know, I worked out a refund deal with the salvage yard that I bought the original used engine from, because I'd already negotiated a core charge, so there was no concerns about me bringing the core back, which is what most salvage yards want you to do, because then they at least make a little money, you know, scrapping the remains or recycling the remains. So, you know, I was like, look, you know, I don't want to spend another 12-hour day coming out here just to bring this thing back, and shipping it is definitely not an option right now. I looked it up, and it would cost more to ship it than I paid for the whole motor. So because you'd have to ship it by truck freight, and then you got to pack it up properly and mount it on a pallet and all this, that, and the other. So that really wasn't an option. So I negotiated the court charge, and that way I didn't have to worry about bringing anything back to him. So at this point, at that point, the only discussion to be had was, what amount I was going to be refunded. And, we knew for sure we had one relatively new head or newly done head on there. We weren't so sure about the back one or the front one. So it was a bit of a gamble, but the salvage yard ended up refunding me a portion of what we paid for the motor, which I was fortunate enough to be able to turn right around and use to pay for the engine block that I was able to acquire. So, so at one point I had 3 motors torn down in here. It was quite a mess. So, but at any rate, so at that point we got to where we could then start assembling a good running, reliable engine. And of course I do this anyway, but I was being extra careful to double and triple check everything on this one because of its history for going sideways and every which way but the direction we were intending it to go. And I found the front, technically it's a pre-catalytic converter, or a warm-up converter as they call it, and has started to melt down inside and go bad. Now if you look in the bottom, it looks perfectly fine, but when you look in the top, it's a different story. You can see where it looks kind of like a mountain range there, and that's not good. It should be flat all the way across. So while this catalytic converter is not dead yet, it will be very soon as that substrate breaks down further, and it'll eventually go through the system and clog up the rear catalytic converter as well. At any rate, that's where we're at. Now I'm going to go to my camera, my phone camera here, and we will do a bit of a walk around here and show you our newly assembled motor. And as I said, I apologize. I would have liked to have gone through in excruciating detail like I usually do with every step of the way and 90-part video, but like I said, once we realized that things went cuckoo on us, we kind of had to examine our priorities and go from there. Now you can see this is the piece that I showed you that was broken on the other motor, and until you really start stripping a bunch of stuff off of this engine, you wouldn't notice that it was broken back there. We used to use the best multi-layer steel head gaskets I could find, put new head bolts in it, new timing belt, a kit which comes with all the idlers, the tensioner, a water pump, and of course the belt. Then it was just a matter of the tedium of reassembling all the little bits and bobs. And thankfully this motor here, the way they designed this, I gotta hand it to them, you can pretty much put the whole thing together and wire everything up, to stab it in, because you've just got your harness here that comes across and hooks to the PCM. Now, there are some other sensors that come off the firewall and all that sort of thing, but not very many. The other thing I'd mentioned early on in the first part of the video is that I was going to install a defeat device for the variable cylinder management. Now, just by the mere fact that one of these things exists is tantamount to the severity of this issue. What it does is it basically fools the computer into thinking that while the engine is warmed up, it's not warmed up enough to the threshold where it will allow the variable cylinder management to cut out the back 3 cylinders. So in effect, disabling the VCM system. You'll see this little light that says eco on it that comes on your dashboard as you're driving under certain conditions, like coasting or holding a steady speed on the interstate or something like that. It essentially drops it down from a 3.5 liter to a 1 point whatever 3 cylinder. In concept, it's good, a good idea, and it obviously does work to some extent, but this particular design just had a heck of a lot of issues. This defeat device, there's a couple different kinds out there. What I learned is that it's better to spend a little more money and get the smart one, because there's 2 different kinds. There's the intelligent defeat devices, and there are the dumb ones, as you call it, or passive ones that just have different resistor packs, and you constantly have to change them out with depending on ambient conditions, whether it's like summer or winter, that sort of thing, because your temperature sensor here works on varying resistance, and the computer reads that varying resistance and then extrapolates an engine temperature based on its programming. So what this thing does, if you use a passive one, you have to experiment with resistors that plug in. The device jacks into the harness, inserts between the coolant temperature sensor and then the wiring harness going to the PCM. With the passive ones, you basically plug a resistor in parallel with the sensor, and you have to experiment to find the right resistor value that'll keep the eco mode off. The intelligent ones have logic built into them and will work usually right out of the box. It may throw a check engine light one time because the computer sees something drastically different all of a sudden, but in this case I don't think it will, because we've had the battery out of this thing for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks now, so I'm sure the computer's memory is wiped out. But the smart one here will automatically calibrate itself to the right resistance for the ambient temperature to keep that eco mode off, or variable cylinder management off. And the good thing I like about this one is that it's smart, because all the while it's still monitoring your actual engine temperature, as well as the fake engine temperature that it's sending the computer. And if it detects the engine overheating, then it will bypass itself, and then you'll just have straight, accurate, readings going to the computer, and the temperature gauge and all that sort of thing. So it's pretty cool, pretty nifty little setup. You can get them for about 150, 200 bucks depending. This one I got from a company in Canada, and I'll link to it in the description. And it took about 3 or 4 days to get here. It has to come through customs and all that sort of thing. There's a couple different ones out there, and of course there's bazillions of the passive ones. I'm kind of enthusiastic and optimistic about this one. It's had really good reviews. So, and of course, you see it sits kind of tidy and out of the way, and then all it takes is you just hook this up to the battery. Its parasitic draw is so negligible, it just doesn't matter. So basically what I'm waiting on right now, I'm waiting on my replacement catalytic converter to get here. It's supposed to be here between noon and 3 today, hopefully. Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise, as they say. Once I get that, it's a whole lot easier to put it in while the cradle's sitting down here than it is to stick it in with everything put together. So we'll do that, and then in the next chapter or scene, you'll see us setting the body down and hooking everything up.